On this week's edition of Money in Your Pocket, we'll be talking about housing choices for later in life. Our guest is U of I Extension educator Kathy Sweedler. Now, we'd all like to live in our homes for as long as possible, but at some point that may not be an option. Kathy will talk to us about when and how to start researching and thinking about your later in life housing goals. We'll talk about financial planning, family dynamics, and more just ahead on this edition of Money in Your Pocket.
This program is made possible in part by Credit Union One. Proud to support Money in Your Pocket. Credit Union One offers savings and lending options. Additional information on membership available at creditunion1.org. Loans subject to approval. Accounts are insured up to $250,000. By member's choice, this institution is not federally insured.
Welcome back to this edition of Money in Your Pocket. I'm your host, Lori Banks. Today, Kathy Sweedler from the University of Illinois Extension has joined us again, and we're going to talk about housing choices for later in life. Thanks for coming back.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, so I think we should begin the discussion with, maybe you could start off with, what are some questions that you should be asking yourself about where do you want to live later in your life, in your golden years?
Okay, well, I think that's, a really good thing to think about. And one of the places I think we need to start is thinking about what are our current needs and wants. Mm-hmm. If we think back to the time when we first started our own housing situations, and we may be living in apartments or transitioning from, our parents' homes into other things, the housing that appealed to us in our 20s or 30s, maybe when we had little kids, those may not be what would really appeal to us now, mm-hmm. or in a few years as we're moving on in age. And it may not fit our needs either. And I think what can help us to think about it is, we have different housing needs in all phases of our mm-hmm. life. And as we age, they change.
All right. So it's always, I think, a good idea to probably be thinking about these things before it's a crisis situation.
Absolutely. Housing is kind of a big deal. Mm-hmm. Our homes mean a lot to us. They're more than just shelter. If it was just a matter of four walls and a roof, then we could be happy in almost any situation. But it's not that. If you think about it, we have a lot of memories associated with our houses. We make them ours. We decorate. We have our personal history in our homes. And so when you're thinking about making a change in housing, then it's important to do some planning and to really have some conversations with other people that are close to you that may also have their own memories tied up into that housing.
All right, so I know that a website has a really good tool on it for kind of figuring out, kind of helping you navigate sort of this stuff, and I want you to kind of walk us through that.
Okay, well, we have a website that's called Longterm Care, and how to plan and make decisions about it. Mm-hmm. And one of the sections on there is all about housing, because that's really a big part of our sort of decision making as we age. And there are tools on there to help you think about what's important to you in terms of housing. What do you like and what don't you like? So for example, some of us really like to get when we think about what we've enjoyed in the past in housing is homes that have a lot of natural light coming in. Mm-hmm. So maybe big windows is important to you. That doesn't mean you have to have a house with big windows. Maybe what it means is if you're looking at an apartment, you want to see if you can get a corner apartment that has windows coming in multiple places. Mm-hmm. So identifying the characteristics can make us really help us out in mm-hmm. in that way.
What about actually a couple of questions you should maybe ask yourself as you age? Maybe that two-story house that you lived in and raised your family, maybe now as you're getting older, should you ask if that house is safe, is conducive to you at this age?
I think that is really important. Again, needs change. Mm-hmm. When you needed a lot of space and you were happy to run up and down the stairs, 20 times a day and just consider that your exercise routine, then that's one thing. But we want to make sure we're safe in our homes. And sometimes our homes can get cumbersome in terms of stairs, in terms of having access, in and out of the house safely. And those are really important issues to think about, mm-hmm. and to think about whether you're still feel comfortable in that home, or are you starting starting to feel isolated because it's hard to get in and out, or because you don't feel like you know your neighbors anymore. Those are important things.
Yeah, your neighborhood maybe changes. Maybe the people that live there when you had kids, they're all gone, and you don't know a lot of these people anymore.
That's right. And maintenance on a home can be a big deal. We tend to kind of forget about all the costs that are associated with maintenance. I think when it snows here in central Illinois, then it kind of comes back, oh yeah, how do I get my car out of the garage and out of the driveway? So snow removal and gardening, those are kind of obvious ones. But we have other things, like in order to maintain a home, you have to think about like roof repair, and some of our larger appliances, like our heaters and our air conditioners, have finite lifespans. So on the website, there's actually a really nice worksheet that you can download for free that allows you to think about, what kind of maintenance do I predict for my home in the next 5, 10, 15 years, and how do I plan to pay for that? So you kind of a checklist of what am I going to need to do, and that can be a real eye-opener when we start thinking about the costs of staying in your home as well as the safety versus moving to some other type of arrangement.
Now, you shared with us a really good idea about making a field trip day out of looking for maybe your next home or your living situation. I want you to talk more about that.
Well, sure, because we have so many wonderful opportunities and new facilities being built in all the communities around us. And I think a lot of people still have a picture in their mind of, for elder care, a nursing home that's just really sterile and not very pleasant. And really, a lot of the places are more like resorts.
Yes, they are.
And so, I think what can be a lot of fun is to get a couple of friends together and set up some tours of facilities nearby and just go see them, get tours with your friends, kind of compare and contrast. What do you like about one place? What do they offer you? What are the costs versus another place? And have some of that decision making in your hands rather than letting somebody else, like other family members, make that decision for you in a crisis.
Yeah. And I think finding out what that costs is going to be very helpful in, the discussion we're going to have a little later in the show is about financing all of this. What should someone do? As you said, it's best if you can make the decision yourself, but often what happens is your adult children have to come in and assist with that decision, or maybe they're the ones to bring it up. How do you, I know there's adult children out there probably watching, well, how do I bring this up to mom or dad in a way that's delicate but effective?
I realize this is a hard thing, because as much as we talk about the pros and cons of changing homes, one, there's always inertia. Nobody wants to move.
Not really. It's a lot of stuff to back up.
And so there's all of that. But I think coming back to really, what are your wants and needs? Safety is always high, but also, are you still feeling independent? Are you comfortable in your home? Are you starting to feel uncomfortable in your home? And then I think one of the other flip side of this too to realize is sometimes it's the older adult that's ready to sell the family home, and it's the adult children that aren't ready to let go of it.
Oh.
So there's a lot of potential emotions on both sides of this conversation. Maybe the important thing is just to start talking about it and feel like how people are feeling about it. Maybe we're anticipating there's going to be an issue and there isn't going to be an issue. Or maybe it's something where if we could start the conversation early enough, then people have time to get used to it. So when there's really a need, it's a little bit easier to talk about.
Is there, do you think, a generational thing, maybe like people my age, I look forward to moving to assisted living someday where I can have someone do my hair, drive me. Is the generation right now maybe a little more resistant to that idea and seeing it as giving up their independence?
I think it's interesting. We don't really have any research on this, and it is that independence issue.
Yes.
So I know that, when I ask a group of middle-aged women, how does it sound to have somebody fix dinner for you and clean your place? We're like, we're there. But then I don't know that we fully maybe thought about having to downsize and lose some of that independence. Although having somebody drive me around, especially on an icy day like today, sounds really good. So I'm expecting that maybe it will be easier for our generation to move up to that. We're more used to paying for services than older generations, and this is really a way of paying for services.
So our show is called Money in Your Pocket, so we need to bring the money aspect into this housing transition. What are some things that we need to think about in terms of money and financing this next stage in our life?
Yeah, and I think this is scary because people don't have the information. So I'm really advocate gathering information, kind of going back to that idea of what is it really costing you to stay in your home? Sometimes people aren't fully cognizant of all the costs associated with that. Again, on the website, there's a tool you can download where you kind of jogs your memory about all your expenses you might be having in your home, what you're paying for in terms of garbage pickup, utilities, you know, all those kind of costs of being where you are. And you can list those. And then, let's say you found an assisted living place that looked appealing, you could list those costs and really, you know, put in the fact that you may be getting meals there that are part of this lump sum versus going to the grocery store and things. So adding all that up, it'll give you a better picture of what the change might be in moving things. So one, understanding your costs and what you're paying now, what you might pay in the future is a big deal.
Yeah, because I think sometimes if you go to a look at an assisted living place and you see this monthly rate that's pretty high, you think, oh, I can't afford that.
Right.
But look at what that all encompasses. What are you getting for that?
Right, and a lot of times you're getting transportation services, so maybe then you wouldn't keep your car, then you don't have auto insurance, you don't have home insurance, you know, if you switch to renter's insurance, it's much less. So those are the, you know, we don't think about all the kind of the ripple effect of that change.
One of the things that was listed on the website under the financing section is, what if you are house rich but cash poor?
Right, so for people who want to stay in their homes, sometimes they start really having trouble with things like the property taxes and maintaining the home. So one thing that people do look at times is getting a reverse mortgage. Essentially with a reverse mortgage, you're pulling out the equity in the home in order to get sort of monthly or annual payments of cash that would help for these other costs. It's something that you can consider. You need to be aware, you need to really look at the costs of it. Number one, you won't get the full value of your home. Sometimes people think that's happening, but that's not going to happen. And also the upfront fees can sometimes be very high. And so you really want to look at what are the fees and the costs of that. How many years will you be doing this? Is it really going to pay out? And then it's a good conversation to have with others that are in your family that you care about, because you are pulling down the equity in that home, which means that there will be less equity when in your estate.
All right.
So those are sort of the big issues. And also, I guess the other big thing to think about is, this is a contract. It's an important contract. With any contract, I always advocate you have other people read it to make sure that you fully understand all the pieces in it. Definitely other people that you trust, but perhaps also a lawyer, so you really understand the contract.
All right. So if it's something you're considering, you advise don't go about it on your own. Get some advice from a financial advisor, maybe a CPA, you know, those people that help you out with money
and
decisions.
Just because it's not a decision I'd make quickly. It's a financial tool that's out there. It's a financial tool that can be good for some people, but you need to consider it in the kind of the framework of all kinds of things.
I think another one that people are probably familiar with, but maybe don't know everything, is long-term care insurance. What do we need to know about that?
So long-term care insurance is, again, another financial tool that's out there. It can be a good fit for some people, and for other people, it's not as good of a fit. It tends to be relatively expensive for some people given income ranges. So it's really about how much can you afford. You're going to be paying a monthly premium. Like other insurance products, you don't get anything. You typically don't get anything out of that product unless you use it, right? And so what we worry about is people who start paying these long-term care premiums and maybe pay it for several years and then just realize they can't afford to keep it up, and then they drop the policy before they use it. And so you want to make sure that not only can you afford it today, but you're going to be able to afford it for the long term. So that's number one. And that's probably, and then you want to look at ways that you can lower the costs of it. There are different strategies for taking out a larger deductible and things like that that might bring down those monthly premiums. And I think that's invaluable too.
So would long-term care insurance be eligible, obviously, if you're in a nursing home, but does it work in an assisted living facility, or does it depend on the policy?
It depends on the policy. And what they're going to be looking at, what you want to look at is when does it kick in? What triggers it?
Okay.
And typically it will talk about activities of daily living, or ADLs. And it may say that the person has to need help with 3 out of 6 ADLs, activities of daily living. So maybe preparing food, getting up out of bed, having help making it to the bathroom, those types of things. It won't kick in just because you want to move to assisted living.
Okay.
So you want to look at what is it that says now I would be able to use this policy.
And what did you say before we taped the program? The average length of stay in a nursing home is not as long as we think?
Yeah, so again, it's always playing the averages, and no one individual is the average. So there's a large range there. But to be honest, it's often more like 3 months than 10 years. Now, of course, everybody's going to say, but I know somebody that did, and that's true. So we have to weigh our risks and versus the cost of different things. So, but again, we are really, people tend to be very worried about the costs of nursing homes for good reasons, but it is something to think about. We also do have, a government plan, Medicaid, that can kick in and help people when they're in a nursing home. And it doesn't mean that the spouse is going to get kicked out of your residential home if one person goes into the nursing home. There is a spousal living allotment that allows you to keep your home. So these are complicated decisions. Really one of those things where, again, takes a little bit of research. We have a lot of information on the long-term care website that we'll be posting, but also talking to a financial planner that can help give you some advice, and other family members.
It's interesting on this show, we talk a lot about retirement, and you kind of think that's the last financial thing that you have to worry about. But actually, this transition of housing, that's kind of another step that, so that leads me to my next question. When should you start thinking about this?
Well, this is a big deal, as you said, because housing is typically one of our biggest assets. So when we start talking about selling our house and using those assets for other things, it is a big deal. I think actually that you should start this conversation sooner than later. And so to be honest, I think if you have young adults that are 20s or 30s, you should, as an older adult, you should start having this conversation with them now, so that they know that you're thinking about it, you're making plans. I'm not one of those people that necessarily wants my younger adults to make those decisions. I want to make those decisions. In the same way, going back, you should think about asking your parents these kinds of questions before it's an issue. It's kind of like doing sex ed before it's an issue. You want to do this stuff before anybody's going to have any emotions really attached to it. So, the more we can have these kinds of family conversations around financial and housing topics before it's a crisis, the so much easier it is on everybody.
It's sort of like funeral planning. It's actually easier, because my mother went ahead and did it now. She's not ill, she's not that old, but when you think about when you have to, as you said, when we started those crisis mode decisions, it's always harder to make the right decision when it's this immediate need.
And we also sometimes think that this will only kind of happen when people are really old, but that's not true. We can have an accident at any time, and I'm not wishing that on anybody, but that can be something that can happen at any time, where we really need to have things like wills and plans in place, not just when we get old, but as soon as we have assets or beneficiaries that are going to be involved in that.
I wanted you to talk about another government website called eldercare.gov. What can we find on that site as far as resources? That's
a great website because it then points you to a lot of other resources. So it's kind of a way to filter out. And it's really nice whenever you have questions about financial abuse or assistance for somebody in a home that needs assistance, or resources in a community for older adults. Because you can put in either the topic or your zip code and then search for resources locally. And for a lot of us, we don't live close to our families, so we can't just run down the street for a resource. We're looking for what's happening in a community, maybe in another part of the state or even in another state.
Okay. So oftentimes we think of moving from our house to someplace else as a negative. You're such a positive person. I want you to put some positive spin on that idea of transitioning to someplace else.
Well, I do, talk to people about this. And I do hear from people who say, I was reluctant to do this, but now I'm feeling much more social. I've made new friends by moving into an assisted living situation. I can get out and about more because there's transportation available. Even cooking for yourself. Very few people find it fun to cook just for themselves. Yeah. And so eating habits tend to go down as people are living by themselves. And so going someplace where you can go get meals in a community dining room can actually improve people's nutritional status and how they feel about themselves. So I do see that as a real positive. I think, again, though, it's hard to make those transitions. Transitions are hard. So I see it both ways.
And sometimes the older we get, those transitions become even more difficult when you think about also having to pack up and get rid of years of stuff and memories. And then you add into that, you've got the family dynamics to consider as well.
And that may be a way to start the conversation, which is, how can I help you? Is there something that's keeping you from moving that I could help with? And it may be, help me clean out the garage.
Yeah,
it could be something as concrete as that. So
talk about some other ways that you can kind of, as you said, with these family dynamics, just asking that maybe, as you said, the reason may be I just am overwhelmed by this idea of having to clean out all of this stuff.
Yeah, I think stuff is an issue, and so I hear it both ways. Like, I know that a lot of elderly people transitioning want their descendants to take a lot of stuff, and those people don't always have room or space or mental space to take all that, those things. So having those conversations and really trying to figure out what's feasible, what can be done, can be a big help. And then, physically, it's hard to clear out things.
It is.
And so that physical help can make a big difference. I think the other thing to bring up too is that sometimes there are alternatives and ways to manage a problem that more minds can help think about. And so you may have a situation where, let's say as an older adult, you have several children. Maybe one child is in a position to help you financially. So they are more than willing to help you financially to make a transition to move somewhere else. Another child might be more in the position to be able to help you physically, like clear out things because of geography or their time or whatever. But when you put it all together, you've got a package that can work. So not assuming that every child's going to do something equally, but there may be different roles. Maybe one child's really good at reading contracts, and that would be the place for them. Then that can also help if you can get people to work together that way.
Yeah. Kathy, we're just about out of time. Is there anything else we need to talk about that we didn't cover?
I think just to keep in mind that this is big decisions, and that the more you can do planning ahead of time, the more you'll get to, as an older adult, make those decisions yourself. And then also they may end up being better decisions when you're not in a crisis mode. Otherwise, if we wait till somebody has a medical emergency to try to make these decisions, then they have to be made very quickly, and they'll be more costly.
So think about it. Just because you're thinking about it doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow, and have those conversations with your family. And if you're the kind of person that likes to be in charge, now is the perfect time to take charge of where your future home is going to be.
That's right. Good way to put it.
All right. Thank you, Kathy, for coming by Money in Your Pocket. It's great to have you on the show again.
Thank you.
Here's today's bottom line for later in life housing goals. Kathy recommends thinking about these decisions before it's a crisis. Ask yourself, is my home still safe? And what does it cost me to live there in terms of upkeep and things like taxes? Talk about your wishes with your family members and take a field trip or two to some places that you might want to live. And when it comes to financing your future housing, there are several options such as long-term care insurance, government programs, and reverse mortgages. All of these should be considered carefully and with the advice of a financial professional. That's our program for this week. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for another edition of Money in Your Pocket.
This program is made possible in part by Credit Union One. Proud to support Money in Your Pocket. Credit Union One offers savings and lending options. Additional information on membership available at creditunion1.org. Loans subject to approval. Accounts are insured up to $250,000. By member's choice, this institution is not federally insured.